In the heart of a small, forgotten village nestled between the steep cliffs and dense forests, there stood an ancient, crumbling mansion. It was a place shrouded in mystery, a relic of a bygone era that had once thrived, but was now consumed by decay. The villagers spoke of strange happenings within its walls, of dreadful sights glimpsed through the dusty windows that lined its facade. There was an unspoken rule among the townsfolk: no one entered the mansion after dark. Yet, curiosity is a powerful force, especially for a young soul yearning for adventure. Thomas was no ordinary boy. Fascinated by the tales of the mansion, he often stood at its rusted gates, peering through the overgrown brush that obscured the path. The stories of a malevolent spirit, a watcher in the window, intrigued him more than they frightened him. They say the ghost of the mansion's last owner still lingers. Old Mrs. Blackwood had whispered to him once, her eyes wide with caution. A reclusive man he was, driven mad by grief. Beware his watchful gaze, for he seeks a companion in his eternal solitude. The words echoed in Thomas's mind as he found himself standing there once more, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced eerily in the dim light. His heartbeat quickened with excitement and trepidation. Ignoring the warnings echoing in his head, he pushed the gate open, its rusty hinges squealing in protest. The path to the mansion was lined with twisted trees whose gnarled branches reached out like skeletal fingers, as if trying to grab those foolish enough to cross. Thomas took a deep breath and pressed forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. As he neared the mansion, the wind picked up, howling through the trees as if trying to dissuade him from his quest. His heart racing, Thomas climbed the stone steps to the sturdy oak doors. At first, they refused to budge under his weight, but finally, with a strained groan, they gave way, opening into a vast, darkened hall. Dust motes danced in the air, illuminated by the faint beams of moonlight seeping through the boarded-up windows. The air was thick with the musty odor of neglect. Silence enveloped him, a suffocating silence punctuated by the occasional drip of water somewhere deep within the mansion. Undeterred, Thomas began to explore. The mansion seemed endless, each creaking door revealing rooms frozen in time. Dust-covered furniture lay scattered about, remnants of a life once lived. Then, as he entered what appeared to be a study, something caught his eye. A chill ran down his spine as he beheld an ornate mirror hanging on the wall. His reflection appeared different, almost altered, as if the Thomas in the glass was not him at all. He blinked uneasy, shrugging off the feeling. He moved closer to inspect the room. Papers and books lay strewn across a massive wooden desk, untouched and forgotten. One book, slightly ajar, caught his attention. Its title was faded, but the few legible words piqued his curiosity. "The Secret of the Watcher's Gaze," it read. As his fingers grazed the cover, a sudden sound interrupted the silence. A distant, haunting song played on the piano. It beckoned to him, its melancholic tune echoing through the hallways. Heart pounding, Thomas turned towards the source of the music, drawn to its eerie call. He found himself in the music room, where a grand piano sat in the corner, its keys moving of their own accord. The music enveloped him, drowning the growing sense of dread that clawed at his mind. But then, as suddenly as it began, the music stopped, leaving a void of silence more horrifying than the sound had been. His breaths came in shallow gasps, and he realized he was not alone. In the reflection of the piano's glossy surface, he saw it. A shadowy figure stood by the window, watching him with intense, soulless eyes. Panic surged through him as he backed away, knocking over a chair in his haste. The figure moved, gliding towards him without a sound, determined and resolute. Thomas turned and fled, the sense of unseen eyes tracking him as he raced through the darkened corridors. The mansion seemed to close in around him, each hallway identical to the last, twisting and turning in an unending loop. Desperate, he stumbled into the entrance hall, the doors within reach. As he pushed them open, a fierce gust of wind met him, cold and biting, as if the mansion itself were trying to imprison him. He fought against it, using every ounce of strength until finally, the wind relented. He burst out into the open, running until the mansion was a mere silhouette against the night sky behind him. Out of breath and trembling, he dared to look back. The mansion loomed, silent and foreboding, but the watcher was gone. Only a single window glimmered faintly in the moonlight, like a solitary eye keeping vigil over the village. Nobody believed Thomas when he recounted his tale, dismissing it as a fanciful child's imagination. Yet all he could do was grasp the reality of it in his heart, the memory of those cold, watching eyes forever etched into his soul. From that day on, Thomas never dared approach the mansion again. But some nights, when the wind whispered through the trees, he would swear he could hear the echoes of distant piano notes resonating in the dark, calling out, inviting him back. In the sleepy village of Eldridge, cradled by the rolling hills and mist-laden valleys, there existed an ancient forest known only as Evernight Woods. It was a place shunned by the villagers, whispered about in hushed tones, for the tales of its darkness had woven their way deep into the fabric of local legend. Every child who grew under Eldridge's thatched roofs heard the stories of how the woods came alive at dusk, with shadows that stretched unnaturally in a silence so profound it stifled all sound. Parents warned them to never venture near, especially when the crows began their evening calls, an omen said to signal the awakening of the forest's most sinister inhabitants. Once there was a boy, began one such tale often recounted by the fireside, who dared to defy the warnings. Aiden, they called him, whose heart was as wild as the very woods that ensnared him. Aiden McKellen was not afraid of stories. At the tenders of 15, he found the tales of whispering shadows and creeping dread to be nothing more than the product of overwrought imaginations. He laughed at the warnings of grown men and the weeping prayers of old wives. In his mind, Evernight Woods was a simple gathering of trees, nothing more, and he intended to prove it. One fateful autumn eve, under a sky ablaze with the dying light of day, Aiden set off with his lantern and a steady heart, determined to uncover whatever was that made his neighbors cower. He slipped into the forest's embrace as the last crow called out, its call echoing like a toll on the air. The forest was strangely quiet, the usual craning chirps now swallowed by an unyielding quietness. With every step deeper into the woods, the path became obscured by gnarled roots and a heavy mist that hugged the earth like a shroud. The trees, thick with age, watched with twisted branches, their bark imprinted with the faces of grotesque curiosities. Here and there, Aiden thought he heard soft whispers, like a conversation just out of reach, but he shook his head to clear the imaginings. Nothing but stories, he reassured himself, swinging his lantern aloft, its flickering light doing little to penetrate the creeping gloom. Yet, as the hours trudged onward, the woods grew denser and the air colder, chilling Aiden to his bones. The whispers strengthened, turning into a cacophony of murmurs that seemed to seep straight into his being. It was a language he couldn't understand but felt in the very marrow of his bones, a call to join it, to succumb to an eternal rest amongst the trees. Aiden, it coaxed, soft and now almost tender. Rest with us. Aiden stumbled, his heart now caught in the grip of terror he had once mocked. He turned to flee, to find the path that would lead him home, but the way seemed to shift with his every step. The trees closed ranks around him, leaving him no way out. Panic welled inside him, cold and unforgiving. It was then that he saw them, out of the wavering edge of his lantern's light. Figures ephemeral and haunting. Siddhi, the old tales would call them, spirits that lurk in the twilight, wayward souls denied rest. They drifted closer, formed of mist and shadow, their eyes glowing in unnatural shade. Join us, Aiden, they murmured, in voices like the winter wind through barren branches. One of us? Aiden's breath hitched as they surrounded him, their ethereal hands outstretched, welcoming. Desperate, he clutched the lantern, his last warm promise, and ran. The forest tested him with every stride, roots reaching, branches clawing. But he pressed on, spurred by a fear now woven through every fiber of his young heart. Faintly, through the ensnaring mist, he spotted the fleeting glimpse of dawn, the heralding light of salvation. Aiden surged forward with the last of his strength, just as the forest heaved a collective sigh. The shadows retreating like a terrible tide, he burst from the suffocating darkness into the weak morning light, collapsing onto the dewy grass, spent and shaking. The villagers found him there hours later, clutching an extinguished lantern, his eyes wide with the sights his mouth could not articulate. From that day onward, Aiden neither laughed at stories nor sought the darkness. He grew to be a man wary of the unknown, his hair streaked with premature white. He passed on the tales to his children, his voice steady and solemn. Evernight Woods, he would say, is not a place for the living. It is a kingdom for shadows and lost souls, and those who enter must be wary, for they, like me, may hear the whispers. Join us, one of us. Aiden's tale served as the stark reminder that not all darkness is empty, and sometimes the whispers on the wind are not just the product of superstition, but the mournful call of a different realm.